So when you got put in a position like most of us, when the government does something we know is wrong, we know our rights are being violated, but we don't know why, and we don't know how. That's what started you on researching this, and you applied those skills in your investigation to discovering the path from the day your mother starts in labor. Okay, it might even start before the labor begins, because usually most parents have to go to the hospital, fill out a bunch of papers before the birth certificate is ever filled out. Okay, and that is what starts the process to what we have today, that it is a birth to death system. And that's what you're discovering, correct?
Yeah, it does start in the prenatal care with the hospital. It's not simply it doesn't begin with the birth certificate. The evaluation of the fetus through the various hospital tests and things kind of start the process. Mom and dad, their existence starts the process, because the baby's overall value is determined by the variables of mom and dad. So if mom and dad went to college, then we can presume that this baby is likely to go to college someday. If mom and dad are Hispanic, or if they are white, we might have a different calculation based on whatever is going on in that community as of today. So it begins at that prenatal stage, because really it's mom and dad who are being analyzed in order to determine what type of future the baby's going to have, and what type of contributions economically the baby will likely be able to provide to the communities via its labor, its education, its consumer personalities. All those different things are variable rates by which they decide or determine how much that baby's value is going to be.
Okay. Now, you have documentation to show that it starts before the birth certificate, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if you want me to share, let me know.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll start you guys off with the pictures. So can you see my screen? Are you guys able to see?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is it looks kind of like a social security card, but it's not. It's the public health card. On your birth certificates, you'll find the birth number, or AKA this number. There's 4 of them, but we're only going to focus on the public health one for the time being. So just keep it easy. So what this number represents is entitlements to insurance of the baby. So based on whatever the baby's needs are, and the state will apply, I don't know, food stamps or whatever, then it will end up giving us the kind of insights to all the different entitlements the baby might be able to have. So that's kind of where. Mm-hmm.
At what point is that number given?
That is given actually during prenatal. That's why I say it's pre-birth, okay, because that number is already attached to the fetus.
It is assigned when you fill out the contracts, right?
Yes, that is when you get your contracts, when you very first sign up to get administered into your doctor's care. So when you see your doctor, okay, you fill out all those little registration forms and such. You do the registration, and then when you go to the hospital, you do your admissions paperwork, and all of that paperwork has language in there that we've just, I don't know, overlooked or didn't pay much mind to. So inside of that paperwork is what's really relevant to pay attention to, because what we do is we tell the hospital that we are not capable of managing our children's health and well-being. Therefore, we're going to let you do that, because I mean, that's normal, right? You go to the doctor, obviously they're the expert, so they're going to take care of that for you.
And now you have documentation. You have the contract that shows this, right?
Yeah. So it's not hard to find. Anyone can pull up their own, you know what I mean? It's not a big deal. So if you want to ever see it, you can probably, especially if you have a recent or younger child, you could probably go pull it. So let me pull it up for my screen here real quick so I can show you a little piece of it. Now, as we were talking before, I haven't had a chance to redact the information on here from Mom. So I'm just going to show you the parts that actually count. Not a big deal, but I think that it's so if you've learned contract law, it's so simple. It's like, how did we miss this? It's crazy how we missed this. I don't know, but we did.
Well, the reason why we missed it is because what do we normally do? We do this in everyday life, okay? You go on your computer, you install a program. It says, do you agree to the terms of service? And what do? You click OK. You don't even read them. And then you complain because they're selling your information to all these providers, and you're getting spam calls, telemarketers, because like the cell phone companies, what they do, they sell your number. It's no different. What do we do when we go to a government building to fill out paperwork? They say, sign here, sign here, sign here. And we say, okay, sign, 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 sign. We never read it.
We just trust. That's all we do is trust. And unfortunately, that trust leads to easy targets and ignorance. So now we get stuck in this. You know, you go to your doctor thinking, all I'm trying to do here is get some medical care. And what you don't think deeply about is the fact that what you do when you walk into that room is you give them power of attorney. So you're no longer in charge of your body. They are. They're saying, okay, well, let me do all these tests on you. And they cannot do that without your permission. They cannot do that unless you allow them or trust them to take that power of attorney role. But what we don't think about is, when do you take that power of attorney back? Does it end when you walk out that door automatically? And according to these contracts, I'm going to say no. So the other issue at hand too is that it's not just power of attorney, but it's forfeiture of a right. So if you think of rights as being, you know, something material, you have 5 in your hand, 5 pieces of paper in your hand of your privacy rights, your personal body rights, and all these things. You're giving this to them, but you're leaving it there. So they're holding it in trust. They put it in a little bank and they keep it. Okay. So this is kind of what these contracts are telling us, but we don't realize that it's telling you here, thanks for your rights. Have a nice day. It's permanent. So I was like, whoa. So I'll just kind of read. This is what we're looking at. This is the registration form from the hospital, or I'm not the hospital, from the prenatal care provider. It says, I do hereby voluntary consent to medical care at Christ Community Health Service. I hereby authorize all physicians, dentists, pharmacists, behavioral health providers, and their assistants, including physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and social workers employed by CCHS, to use such diagnostic and
Q&A mode on. Participants may now unmute themselves.
Sorry for that.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll go over it. Procedures they deem necessary for proper medical management and treatment. It's a key word. Medical management, not medical care, not just medical treatment, but both medical management and medical treatment. Okay. I understand that physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and hygienists are not licensed physicians, dentists, and may help provide medical dental care only under the supervision and direction of a licensed physician or dentist. I also assign the claim payments to be made payable to CCHS. So we just assigned claim payments to be made payable to the doctor. So when they go in and they put in a claim against insurance, you're no longer managing your authority to go to the insurance yourself, get the check, and then give it to the doctor. In a perfect world, this would be your power and your authority. But they just took your power and they just took your authority to collect state insurance, or maybe in this case, you might have, private insurance. So this is a financial responsibility you just granted to them. You manage my finances when it comes to my medical management care. I agree to the release of information to Medicare, TennCare, and third-party payers, which is important because who's the third-party payer? Maximus Inc. Now, Maximus Inc. isn't alone in all of this because I use their name only because they're one of the biggest companies that you're going to find most frequently. There are other payors, but they're the biggest one. And, to make it easy, I focus on one. So now you're agreeing.
No, yeah.
Go ahead.
Now we will get into Maximus Inc. I want to go over, just explain these parts, continue doing that, and how this goes to the birth certificate and then to the social, and then from there, how everything that goes on ties in to what they're doing,
right,
to the point where Maximus Inc. comes in.
Okay. So I agree to the release of information to Medicare, TennCare, and third-party payers. So third-party payers also includes child support enforcement, by the way, because child support enforcement also states claim against the state insurance. So this little vague statement it could be anybody. A third-party payer, that's anybody. I understand that some of the services that may be ordered may not be covered under Medicare, TennCare, and other insurance, and that I am responsible for the amount that is not paid. This is the best part. This authorization and assignment is a permanent one-time signature, which will remain on file and will be used for future claims. But here's the nicest thing. I may revoke it at any time by written notice. Huh?
Now, let's pause for a second. Mm-hmm. They put that word assignment there for a reason. Now, certainly. I'm going to pull up Black's Law Dictionary. Now, I'm going to be reading from the 11th, 11th edition. The 11th edition says, assignment, the transfer of rights or property. That is the definition for assignment. This authorization and assignment. And who are you filling it out for? Your children. Now, Go on.
So also keep in mind here, what we've just authorized is the collection of any and all data related to medical management. So that includes any physical, mental health information, the data itself, but it also includes financial, because when we deal with medical care, you don't just take money and start switching it from hands to hand, like I said, with the insurance companies. This power of attorney, this assignment means that when they want to give you some sort of mental health evaluation, they can go ahead and claim state insurance for said medical evaluation, and you would never know it. So I want to make that clear while we get into this. And when we do these assignments, when we assign them the right to manage our data, our personal life information, there is Supreme Court rulings that tell us that when you give someone your personal information, it now belongs to them. They are now the holder of all that information. So you no longer control it, they do. Meaning that they can now pass it on to anybody they want without your permission.
Yes. That has been in the recent history, because after Snowden exposed how the government was spying on everything, that's when we started finding out that you couldn't really sue, say, AT&T or Verizon or your ISP because you consented to give them all your personal data. So when Google gets up there and records everything you do and you voluntarily do it, they own that data by your consent.
Yeah. Yeah, it's theirs, and they can transfer it between each other. And I'm going to show you one of the agreements that they use to do so. So all this data now, is being kept in the hospital. And basically what the hospital or the doctor is saying here is that if any government agency or anyone doing business with the government wants to come and look at your information, they can now do so. They can go through and grab it. I didn't bring it with me on this particular show, but what happens is they borrow it. So it gets banked in National Institute for Health, and then they can go borrow that information. And I'm not sure how it works yet, but they do actually fill out a form that they do a loan on. So I'm not sure yet. I haven't gotten into it, so I didn't want to bring it up until I know more about it. But further, I agree to all consents noted in the above application and approve of the contacts listed in an effort to protect my health information. Well, a lot of parents, I want to mention this because a ton of parents actually tell me, yeah, but there's HIPAA protections. No, the form you signed is not a HIPAA protection. It is a waiver of your rights to medical privacy. You sign a HIPAA waiver. So what they're doing within that exchange is they're saying that we will protect all your information, and that's true. They're protecting it from people like me getting it or people on the street getting it. But they also are telling you that's the only people they're protecting it from. They're still going to give it to agencies and other corporations that they may have contracts with. So that HIPAA thing is not a protective measure that you're signing in the hospital. It's one that you are saying, hey, I'm not gonna worry about it. You handle it. It's all yours. Do with it what you want. So this I don't think we need to go through too much of this part here. So it tells you that there's a long form notice. I haven't gotten it. We tried to get it, and they told us that they don't have a long form notice. So I bet you whatever's inside of there is super interesting. I'd be willing to bet. So now this is telling you each time you visit a healthcare provider, a record of your visit is made. Typically, this record contains your symptoms, examination and test results, diagnosis, treatment, and a plan for future care or treatment. The doctors and staff of Christ Community Health Service, Inc. use and maintain this health information relating to the care you receive from us. The longer notice attached beneath this page contains information to help you understand what your medical record is and how your health information is used. This helps you ensure the accuracy of such information and lets you better understand who, what, when, where, and why others may have access to your health information. So it's telling you here, there are others who may have that access, but they're not really giving you a lot of detail. So this is where we begin. For the baby, this is where their life begins in the data centers. And what happens here is now they register or record this event at Vital Statistics. So that's what Vital Statistics is for, events, which is going to kind of segue us into something else I'm going to show you after here, because the baby's events that are recorded is what's valuable when they are trying to earn revenue on said baby, because the science that they're collecting about the baby is very valuable. They can sell it and trade it around the world, not just here in the States. It goes everywhere. So they explain to you in here that it's also in regards to any kind of emotional care. So if we think about mental health, keep in mind, mental health doesn't mean psychiatrist, psychologist. Mental health can be if you just have an emotional issue that could be temporary. We go through ups and downs throughout our lives. It's just behavioral health in a nutshell. And this is the information that they collect on you while you're sitting there. So if mom goes through postpartum issues or whatever, throughout the pregnancy, she has her emotional, they're noting this. This is the kind of information they're collecting on you. It's not just basic, like, okay, baby's this size, that size. This is the weight of the baby. They're also observing your behavior, and they're noting that in the system as well, that, okay, mom went through some sad times, and that will be there forever for anybody to be able to look at. So information about a patient will not be given to anyone outside CCHS, including family and friends. So family and friends are not going to get the information, but who else will? Unless the patient...
Third parties.
Right, exactly. Unless the patient, parent, or legal guardian of a minor gives written permission. So this is an important statement here. Who's the legal guardian?
Now hold one thing. Can you pause that explanation? Now, I'm not going to say this is the definition. I want to say it is a possible definition because we are dealing with government.
Mm-hmm.
Go pull up 31. Just go in, just open up a tab in a browser and type in 31 CFR 363.6.
On the slow computer, I have a lot of tabs open. Okay, let's see. CFR 31?
Yeah, no, 31 CFR 363.6. Now, my personal opinion, this applies. That's just my personal opinion. Open that first one up.
Let me, what's going on there? Gotta love this stuck there.
Now, scroll down to the word minor.
Meyer?
Yeah, just the word minor. Because the first 1, 2, or 3 words is your word that's being defined. You see how it says Federal Reserve Bank and then it says Federal Reserve Bank means? Every one of them is a definition, every single sentence, paragraph, okay? So you'll have to scroll down to where the first word is minor. There's only 2 of them. One is minor, one is right there. Now it says minor means...
I lost it. I hit the...
Okay, up one more, right there. Okay. It says minor means an individual under the age of 18 years. Now, everybody would agree with that.
Yep.
The term minor is also used to refer to an individual who has attained the age of 18 years but has not yet taken control of the securities contained in his or her minor accounts. Now, remember, the reason why I say when they use the word minor in all their governmental documents, I believe it refers to this unless it specifically defines it in some code. And the reason why is you're going to see as she goes on, this is all, it's nothing personal when they abuse you. It's business. This is about money, which don't even get me into, there is none. It's all securities, but we will discuss that another time. So now you can go back to your contract.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you on that. So the whole issue when it comes to minor and major, yeah, definitely I think of it as being the child identifiers as being the minor account, and the Social Security as being like the adult account. That's kind of how I was thinking about it. But, again, that's speculation at this point. So just a thought based on some of the things that I've read. So now this particular contract, back to information about a patient, won't be given to anyone outside, like your family and friends, but anybody other than your family and friends might be able to see it, unless the patient, parent, or legal guardian, if a minor. Now understand what it means. So if you have, say, a CPS case, CPS comes in standing in local parentis, that means they are now the parent. Then you get a guardian ad litem, they are now the guardian. So there is a parent and a guardian both in a CPS case, but it isn't you. So if you have these people in a court issue where they take over the parent position and the legal guardian position, it also makes you a minor, because now you are dependent upon or reliant upon these people to manage your mental health and care, including the care of the child. So keep that in mind. We'll get deeper into that later, but I just want you to remember that that's in this contract. So, however, we may release patient information to others without the patient's permission if they pose a threat or harm to themselves or others, unable to protect themselves from risk of harm, and is in the legal custody of a government agency or facility. Legal custody.
Wait a minute. That right there.
Yep.
What?
Told you.
How are you in? That goes back to that video I said. You are holding the birth certificate, which is a registered organization.
Well, legal custody isn't physical custody. Legal custody is simply the paperwork, the management of affairs. So legal custody doesn't mean necessarily that you're in the possession of someone. You are in the legal custody of an attorney if he's representing you in court. Your legal person is now in his legal custody so he can manage its affairs. So this is a broad statement. Now,
when you get into if the birth certificate is a registered organization and it was the long form, we're not talking about the short form. We're talking about the long form, and it was not created by you. Okay? It was created by the state. And if what they said on that video is accurate, that it is a registered organization created by you, and you are the holder of said agency or facility, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could see it as applying to that. Because why? You signed the contract at the beginning, turning over your rights. Now you are in, because see, you got to remember there's two types. There's legal ownership and equitable ownership. The state maintains the equitable ownership because you signed them the equity away. You just have legal ownership, or what it says, their legal custody. In other words, the right to use.
Yeah, it's the only thing I created was a little being. You know, that's my creation. Their creation is this nonsense. I didn't create none of that. I mean, but the thing is, as a mother, like I was telling you before, as a mother being an informant, when we think of that as a scientific term that is defined in empirical data studies, it means just that I'm informing you about all the variables for one's existence. So that means to me that the certificate of live birth to me is an undertaking for the insurance. That's what I believe it is. And then you get the certificate. The birth certificate itself issues because of the undertaking was done, and then that birth certificate represents your ability to be entitled to insurance services or insured services by state and federal insurances. That's how I see it. So an undertaking only, I mean, if you know anything about like mortgages and things like that, undertaking is an evaluation of all the different variables that determine what one's risk is, risk to pay or risk not to pay. Well, that's ultimately what they're doing with the baby. So what they can't possibly know what the baby's risk is unless the informant mother says, okay, well, in my history, there's cancer, in dad's history, There's alcoholism. We both graduated high school. Both of us, went to college. So this is how they're undertaking to determine what the baby's risk is for future claims against the insurance. That's what I believe it to be. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And when I show you the Social Security stuff, it will probably become a little clearer. So,
well, this, I'm sorry, most of this, because of what you're saying and how you're explaining it, it still puts me in the mindset of the eugenics movement.
Yeah.
Before World War II, eugenics became very popular in this country, and they have developed a system to basically classify us. And what does the elite call us? Useless eaters? That they own it all, and we're just using up their resources. And look,
I think that's where the consumer title comes from. If you think about it, one who consumes, what you're saying would be relevant.
Mm-hmm. Now, so go on.
Okay, so where were
and Jeremy, if you have a question or you got a comment, be sure and step up.
I know, I feel like everybody's so quiet. Either they're sleeping because I'm boring them to death, or they're in shock.
From the comments I'm getting, do what, Jeremy?
I'm just taking notes.
Okay. Now, from some of the comments I'm getting, there is a little bit of shock going on because people are saying, "Oh my God, this makes way too much sense."
Unfortunately, and please don't shoot the messenger, guys. I just want to share with you the truth. This isn't my creation.
Yes. So go on explaining the contract.
Okay, so the patient is in the legal custody of a government or agency facility. There is evidence of child abuse. Now, mind you, it doesn't say that there's child abuse. There only needs to be evidence of child abuse. And then they can take over and manage the care of the child and the parent. The patient's clinical records are requested under court order, or the patient is referred to a collection agency in order to collect an overdue account. That could be anything, because these agencies are actually defined as data collection agencies because they collect data. So are they speaking of a financial collection agency? Are they speaking of a data collection agency? I think we could look at it either way. So there are fees for all services, and patients are asked to pay on the day they are seen. Health insurance policies may cover a portion of fees, and staff will help the patient in making claims. There's your dependency. I can't make claims for myself. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to rely upon you to do it. Here's power of attorney. Patients are asked to tell CCHS about changes in financial status. Why? The professional staff of this facility will depend on statements made by the patient, the patient's medical history, and other information to evaluate his or her condition and decide on the best treatment. The evaluation and treatment of children and adolescents often requires, but not always, the involvement of the parent and or other family members, except in cases where family planning or obstetrical services are provided. So anytime family planning or obstetrical services are provided, they don't need permission. I find that interesting. Health professions are not exact sciences, and no guarantees are made concerning the course of treatment proposed by the provider. Any questions about benefits, risk, available options, or the limits of confidentiality should be directed to the treatment staff. But we never do that. We never ask about limits of confidentiality. We just put our trust that they're doing the right thing. In treating patients, studies including laboratory tests, x-rays, EKGs, or psychological tests may be warranted. There are risks in taking medications, and any questions about medications will be answered by the medical staff. So I understand that if I'm 13 or older, I may consent to family planning or obstetrical services. If I am 16 of age or older, I may consent for mental health services. And if I'm 18 years or older, I may consent for all other health services. Otherwise, my parent or legal guardian will need to consent for services. So again, remember, if there's any evidence of child abuse, They don't need that consent. The doctors and nurses and anybody else on staff can make those decisions. By signing this form, parent or legal guardian signature is required. If required, I agree that I have read or had this form read and or explained to me, that I understand it and that any questions I asked have been answered. I understand that I agree to be truthful in providing information. Thus, I hereby ask and agree to evaluation and treatment for myself and or my children, including any studies or procedures that CCH professional staff decides themselves are necessary. That's a huge statement. So what you're saying,
because they have the decision of
the
what is
decision.
necessary.
Right. Isn't that huge? How did we miss this? I want to bang my head in the wall for not thinking. And look at how it says in here that you're saying someone explained this to me and I understand it. And in reality, you know dang well none of us ever had this explained to us, not once in a single instant. Nobody ever explained that. But here we are signing saying that it was explained. Got to read your contracts, friends. Got to read them. Horrible, huh? But yeah, that's basically, in a nutshell, the different documents you sign at the hospital level. So there's a couple of more, but like I said, I haven't had an opportunity to get them redacted because they have some serious information in them. I don't want to cause for any embarrassment for anyone or anything. So, but this is the main ones that get us into that predicament of we're giving them power of attorney, and we are doing this on a permanent level because it says up there your signature and your permission is permanent. And then what happens next is they take this information and they will give it over to how do you call that? It's like a data control center or whatever. So this information itself. So this young lady went to how do you call it? Baptist Hospital. But when the attorney pulled this information, it from Baptist Hospital, it was from COI. See that right there? So COI is a data collection company that specifically banks medical information. So now that you've told the hospital they can do whatever they want with your information, they gave it to this company.
Now,
so
let me interrupt because I meant to ask a question. Those contracts before, those are all with the hospital if your children are fairly newborn, right?
Well, yes, but they also will keep that record for an eternity. It only gets archived.
Yeah, but the reason why I'm asking is somebody was asking how do they get copies of them, and I think it also depends on your age, because somebody like me, you, and Jeremy, somebody like me, you, and Jeremy, that we are all in our, up there in age. I'm in my 40s, so are you. So we would have to go somewhere else to get them because the hospital probably don't have the copies of them, right?
Yeah,
but if you have a child within a few years old, they might have them. So how would someone get copies of those contracts or their files?
So we got these, and I'll tell you right now, it wasn't easy. We got these from the hospital, and what they were doing is they'd give us a half of the records, and we'd have to go back and ask for more. Like, you didn't give us everything. So it took a couple of trips over there for us to actually get everything, but we did. So you can just go straight to your hospital administrator, the records keepers that are there, and they should have this on file. I would guess they'd keep it at least for 10, maybe longer years. If they do not keep their records that long, they should disclose to you who they give those records to because they archive them. But in addition to that, I do believe that the National Institute for Health keeps these records on a more permanent basis. So I have not gotten deeply into figuring out the National Institute for Health record system yet, but believe you me, I'm on it. So if they do have it, I will find out, and then I will let you all know when I do. But again, keep in mind too that they are banking all this information to save data space, to save data storage space, to save money. That's why they give it to this company like COI. because COI is a data center, a data storage center that has a lot of space it rents out for hospitals and others to put the information in there. So it's likely archived at COI if this particular hospital has been doing business with them long enough, right? So it just depends on your hospital.
Now, I'm reading the first couple of sentences. It said the federal rules prohibit you from making any, let's see, COI has provided to you protected health information that may contain information that falls within 42 CFR Part 2. The federal rules prohibit you from making any further disclosure of information in this record that identifies a patient as having or having had a substance use disorder. Now, what went through my mind was that child identifier number.
Mm-hmm.
If it's that child, if it's based on said number and doesn't name the name, is that the workaround?
This is how we are secure in our persons, because there will not be any personal identifiable information when they are sharing amongst the agencies. They will share these identifier numbers, and that's how they can say that these records belong to the person, which is kind of a little complicated. In data world, in data land, we have what are called personids or person IDs. Okay, so a person ID or personid is just a packet of data that has a shell around it, so that when the data is transmitted, all that data, that specific data, will stay inside that packet, creating a personid or a person ID. And so now if your person ID is 12345, and there is a bunch of information about your medical being inside of there, that packet of data called a personid now will always be identified as 12345. And if I'm in my record system and I want to pull that information up, I won't pull it by your name. I'll pull it by 12345. And then it opens up that packet for the computer to interface with me and translate all that information into English outside of binary code. And this is actually what this system does when you think about like your all caps name. That is a subdomain name. So if my personid, my packet of data is at the hospital, and a nurse wants to get that information, she won't know the binary code 12345. Okay, that's for people who work behind the scenes. She'll have to pull my name. So when she pulls my name, she is entering into the hospital's computer database or the computer domain, and she is looking up a patient person named Très Bien. That is a subdomain of the hospital. That information opens up everything about me that the nurse has access to. So all of these different agents, agencies, corporations, or whatever allow for personnel to have certain levels of access. So the nurse might be able to see the basics, but the doctor might be able to go in deeper to find out all the different things that have been wrong with me over the years. And a surgeon could go even deeper. So it's level 1, 2, and 3 of access to the information that's inside. And each different professional has a different level of access. And this is throughout everything you do in life. It's not just the hospital. This is, if you're dealing with police, if you're dealing with the courts, they also have access to information, and they have levels of access by which they can take from domain, and it breaks down to subdomain, and then it breaks down again to a semi-subdomain. Identifiers that will open up computer information or packets of data. Make sense? Or is that confusing?
Mm-hmm.
I know.
No,
I can go on for days. I'm a
me.
computer girl, so
it's not confusing. It's not confusing to me because I've known a little bit about these big government databases for a while. It's like I've seen the stories where some mother, when she was a child, had problems with CPS, like her parents had problems with CPS. So she gets old enough, she's had a good life, she's responsible finishes school with straight A's, but she's pregnant. She goes to the hospital to give birth, and CPS is right there on it.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, there was a big story a few years ago about that.
Yeah, and a lot of the times you will find that most people involved, well, not all, but a lot of people involved with CPS were previously involved with CPS as children themselves, and that is very deliberate. So remember, once in CPS, you're determined to have a disability because you experience many emotional disturbances throughout the course of your stay with them, I'm sure. So they consider that to be a lifelong disability. And therefore, you're always going to be targeted because you're always going to be in need. And they know this. So that it does put a target on your back. And it does, we do have a computer system that will flag you from every angle. Like if you go to a hospital in, say, Tennessee, and from Illinois, you had a drug result that was positive during, pregnancy. While you're in Tennessee, CPS might be alerted to your move. It's crazy. All these systems communicate, and they all agree to trade and share all this information amongst all the various different places that it goes. So in this case, it's medical information, anything that has to do with medical, anything, even mental health. It all comes together for any of these agencies to collect about you. And then they bank it with these third-party data collection agencies. And from the data collection agency, they make money because people can purchase this information and pay for it. So it's a very, very lucrative business, this data trade.
Well, the insurance companies love it. But go on.
Oh, yeah. So what this whole thing here that I'm about to show you is about, it's basically a warning shot to someone who filed a subpoena. So this is a CPS case that we're looking at. And I had gone to the attorney, the appointed attorney, to get his records, because it just seemed weird. The record of the courtroom wasn't making sense. Something was missing. So we told him to turn over his records. And sure enough, he gave us this. This was not at the courthouse. What this is a subpoena to COI for the information that the hospital gave them. So they actually picked this up and sent a subpoena to get this information through her attorney. Because remember, the attorney now makes your decisions in regards to your legal affairs. He never told her that they wanted this information or that they subpoenaed this place for this information. And so we didn't know it existed until I think she was already like 8 months into her case. So they had subpoenaed this. This is not on record. They did not put this into evidence or anything. And all this really, I won't get into details too much, but all this really is it tells them to the COI, the data bank, we want this information. And this is a subpoena that if no one objects to the subpoena for said information within 7 days, you have to give it to us. So obviously nobody objected to them getting this information. And so of course,
no objection letter.
Huh?
Yeah, it said no objection letter.
Yeah, so it's all of that's all that is. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it'll be hours if we did, but I just wanted to kind of show you what it looks like when they send these subpoenas and such. And see here, nobody objected. Therefore, sure, we'll give you everything you want. Slick, huh? How rude. But that's kind of in a nutshell the contract side of things. So to give you a very better, a clear understanding of when and how we've subjected ourselves to this kind of nonsense. Let's see, I think now we'll go into the calculation. Again, this is really long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to give you a breakdown and a couple of little highlights in this. This is in regards to Social Security Administration, SIP, IRS, PUF. All right. This is a collaborative effort between systems, basically. IRS system. SIP system is basically the program management. If they make a claim against a state insurance, it's called a program. So if you are on a program, it's just basically saying that we're giving you some sort of service, either for mental health, social behavioral health, or TANF, any of those things. Those are all programs. And that's what SIP is. It's the master program file. So between these different organizations, they collaborate and share information when the baby is what I call underwritten. So after they find out everything about the baby, they do these variable rates. It's called the gold standard 4.0, which is a scientific term. It just means the best practice in obtaining census information, and the best practice for narrowing it down to develop the variable risk factors and variable asset factors, like what's the good stuff, what's the bad stuff. And they use these systems to do that, to kind of balance it out. So these public use files contains several variables that were never missing and never synthesized. These variables are gender, material status, spouse's gender, initial type of Social Security benefits, type of Social Security benefits in 2000, and the same benefit type variables for the spouse. All other variables in the public use file were synthesized. In order to preserve exact logic relations among the variables, the first step of the missing data imputation process and the first step of the data synthesizing process is to implement a binary tree of parent-child relations among all the variables. This tree guides the execution of the first, sorry, my eyes are bad. This tree guides the execution of first the missing data imputation and then the synthetic data phase. We created a binary tree to organize the data processing by summarizing all of the assumptions and logical restrictions that must be preserved in the final data product. Product of birth. The top level of this binary tree contains all variables that exhibit no logical dependencies on any other variables in the file, for example, birth date. The tree has 9 levels. At each level below the top, variables depend upon their parents and are only processed when appropriate. Okay, so I just kind of want to give you an overview. What they're talking about when they say parent and child isn't you and me. In data attachments, there are parent information packets of data, like we talked about before. So you have that main domain, like I was telling you about. That is the whole kit and caboodle of data collected about you. And then the little child datas, those are smaller packets of more specific, narrowed down information, which is why we have a binary tree. That binary tree, it kind of just will be like you got one main packet, and now you can segment that packet: parent person, patient person, child person. So that way you narrow down all the different data you want to collect in order to build a profile you're trying to build. So I hope that makes sense. I don't want to go too deep into that because it can get complicated, but just so you understand the data collection process in general. Now, all of this information, if you have a program that you've been qualified for, it has to go through these systems and attach the information to specific things. So if you're at the doctor, they're going to attach it as a patient file, right? All the different things the doctors do to you, that's going to be your little sub packet of data. So we would pull your parent file, AKA your name, and then look at your patient number or your patient ID number. And that will open up everything that the doctors say about you, all right? So basically, in a nutshell, all this is telling you is how the calculations work, how the statistical models are created and categorized, and how they basically develop this whole system of when you get programs. If you go to SIP, you can actually pull a master program file about yourself to see all the different programs that you've been qualified for throughout your entire life. It tells you like all the different applications, because when they apply these programs to you, they have to bill it through the state. That's where IRS kicks in. And now that has to get paid. So everyone has to pay their taxes on it. You know how that goes, and so forth and so on. So again, this is probably I could do a whole show on this alone. So I'm not going to get too deep into it. But it's there. So if anybody wants to read it, look at it. You can definitely do that. Any questions about it thus far? Okay, so why this is something I wanted to bring up is I had found something interesting where they were referring to mom as being what is called a ticket holder. The only thing I could find in regards to being a ticket holder of anything means you need to get a ticket to an event. When an event occurs, you might go to some sort of venue where you buy that ticket so that you can attend or witness that particular program or concert, whatever it is. So remember what we were saying earlier is that the Vital Statistics Department records what? Events. So when you're in the courtroom and a guardian ad litem or a CPS agent switches the hands of custody from one parent to the other or to a different place, they do fill out a form and they send it to the Vital Statistics office to notify said office of a change in events of the child's life. And the reason for that is because they are determining that this kind of event was emotionally hard on the child. And that's what they're trying to keep a record or keep track of, is the child's major events that may have altered his personality. So these ticket holders, this is actually something that they're trying to get into where they want to actually give you physical tickets. So if you're a mom, they want to give you like 5 tickets. You can hand them out to, say, a grandmother, a father, a grandfather, a friend. So once those tickets are gone, they're gone. But what they represent is each person being a holder of the legal custody of the child if something happens to mom. So if mom gets kicked out the picture, somebody else can step up and say, I have a ticket for this child, and then they can go ahead and take custody of the child. Because mom is ultimately the ticket holder even as today, right? She's the one who makes the decisions on who gets to attend the events of the child or participate in said events. So this kind of breaks down that, it does work that way today, but ultimately it's behind the scenes and we don't have these physical tickets. So again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to kind of bring it to your attention because it is going to become relevant as we go along and you'll understand. There's a lot of material to go through. This is kind of, like I said, it's so very, very much. I don't want to bore people to death, but bear with me. We're getting there. In depth. This is a report from the Office of the Inspector General in regards to fraud being committed on the birth certificate, which I think everybody will find interesting. So it explains to you what the common use of or intended use of the birth certificate was versus what we actually use it for. So they did an overall investigation to see about fake birth certificates being made for the most part. And I'll read a little bit through it for you because it gives a nice overview of what the birth certificate is. Okay, let's see. All right, so the Department of Health and Human Service programs as well as health and welfare of beneficiaries served by them. All right, this statutory mission is carried out through a nationwide program of audits, investigation, inspection, sanction, and fraud alerts. The Inspector General informs the Secretary.
Muted.
Huh? Did you say
that was me? It was really weird. I got full signal and I didn't lose my hotspot, but my phone calls went completely away there for a minute, so I had to reconnect.
Oh, you fell out?
Yeah, don't make no sense, but go on.
Welcome back. All right, so the statutory mission is carried out through a nationwide program of audits, investigations, inspections, sanctions, and fraud alerts. The Inspector General informs the Secretary of Program and Management problems and recommends legislative, regulatory, and operational approaches to correct them. So it's a good office. I haven't contacted them yet, but I think we should. You know, they obviously have some good insider information. All right, so they conduct short-term management and program evaluations called inspections that focus on issues of concern to the department, the Congress, and the public. The inspection reports provide findings and recommendations on the efficiency, vulnerability, and effectiveness of departmental programs. So legitimate birth certificates provide vital information about the person whose name appears on the certificate. Issuing birth certificates is the responsibility of state registrars and local issuing entities. While originally intended for the sole purpose of birth registration, birth certificates are now used extensively for employment purposes and to obtain benefits, or other documents used for identification. Over the last 25 years, a number of studies have addressed problems related to false identification and the misuse of birth certificates. These studies conclude that false identification is a major factor in crime and that most, if not all, federal fugitives and drug trafficking crimes are associated with false identification. They also conclude that stolen, counterfeit, and altered birth certificates are often used as breeder documents that allow the holder to obtain documents needed to create new identities. The Office of Inspector General has conducted 3 inspections focused specifically on birth certificate fraud that identified a number of vulnerabilities in birth certificate processes. Because so many federal state agencies rely on birth certificates to assist them in determining eligibility for services and benefits, it is important that these agencies have current information on the nature and extent of birth certificate fraud to assist them in the proper assignment and protection of benefits. So that's why I was telling you earlier that I believe the birth certificate itself represents it's proof that the child's value was undertook and that he is therefore now entitled to the necessities as government had promised us. So he's entitled to land grants. He's entitled to mental health services. He's entitled to all the public school services. And that's what that birth certificate represents to me as being what I call a certificate of participation. It is the security of the child's entitlements in Social Security, social services, social health, social economic growth. Like all those different things are secured in Social Security. And that certificate represents the child's ability to participate in that particular securitized trust. That's the way I see it. So if you go up to what it said up top too about it establishing identities, I think that's a huge factor as well. The way identity is established, so in a big picture, we have several various different identities. Like I said, we have a parent identity, we have a driver identity. In order for us to establish an identity, one first has to study what the common practice and procedures of that particular activity is like for that particular part of your personality. So if you're driving, what normally does everybody customarily do when they're driving? They hit the brakes in the middle of an intersection. They stop at a stop sign. They stop at a stoplight. Now that we know this is the customary practice, we can now establish an identification as a driver, what it looks like, and give it a prescribed fiduciary duty of care based on the customary practice of people who also equally identify as such. So this is why it's important to understand that the certificate being something that establishes identity and also allowing for participation in services. All of this will come together at the end, but I want to make it really stand out in your mind, that part right there. So the inspection was initiated at the request of the Department of Health and Human Services to provide information which the department could use to of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. We use two mechanisms to gather information. We gather general information regarding vital records, policies, and procedures from 53 primary vital records registrars using mail surveys. We also collected more in-depth information through personal interviews with state registrars, fraud investigators, and local and state vital records, passport services, immigration and naturalization services, Social Security Administration, and public assistance staff in 5 states in New York City. Isn't that interesting? We also met with the Center for Disease Control Prevention, National Center for Health Statistics, staff who provided us with comments on the draft of this report. Fundamental irreconcilable conflicts surrounding birth certificate purposes and uses. A certified copy of a birth certificate is proof only that a birth occurred and was recorded. So that's all the certified copy is for, not live birth. Certified copy of birth certificate is proof only that a birth occurred and it was also recorded. For the purpose, it may be desirable that the public be allowed easy access to them. However, the agencies and organizations that use birth certificates as proof of identification for employment purposes to obtain benefits or other documents, driver's licenses, social security cards, and passports, and to assist them.
Oh. Look at that. It says other, scroll back up one line. That stood out because scroll up right there, it says, of the agencies and organizations, and then it says to obtain benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So who's getting the benefit? They are.
Yeah, they are. Pretty much. Yeah, because it's a trade agreement, like I said. And you know, all of these purposes that they're using it for wasn't supposed to be, is what the Office of Inspector General is telling us. Like, you weren't supposed to be using it to create a driver's license because of creation of identity, remember. So these agencies are using our birth certificate to create different identifications, like different identities or persons, drivers, you know, like all these different, a traveler, all those different identities come from that. And that is because what happens when we identify a certain group, such as a driver, the state can now insure it. But we need to be able to show that we are certified to get the entitlement of said insurance. That's what I think it's for. But anyways, to assist them in determining eligibility for public assistance and other benefits, may have concerns with how easily certified copies of birth certificates can be obtained. These conflicting perspectives are the very heart of the birth certificate controversy.
I love that next one. It says birth certificates continue to be used as breeder documents.
Breeder documents? You're breeding a new identity. Virtually all federal and state agencies agree that fraudulent birth certificates are used as breeder documents to obtain the genuine documents needed to create new identities. And the fraudulent birth certificates are easy to obtain. Factors which contribute to their use as breeder documents include the following. Currently, 6,422 different entities issue birth certificates. This large number of state, county, city, township, and other entities that issue birth certificates increases opportunities for fraud, theft, bribery, or other methods of illegally obtained birth certificates. 13 states allow open access to birth records, which allows virtually anyone to purchase copies of any birth certificates on file. Birth certificates can be purchased without identification for some vital records offices and issuing entities. Birth certificate fraud is hard to detect. Many altered or counterfeit birth certificates and genuine birth certificates held by imposters may go undetected. The reasons why these fraudulent birth certificates are hard to detect, including the following. Over 14,000 different versions of birth certificates are in circulation. Nearly 4 million United States births were registered in 1999. Security features contained in the paper used to issue birth certificates, as well as formats and signatures, vary among state vital records offices and the many local entities issuing. So if you look at your birth certificate, there's security features. One of the security features is obviously the raised stamp. But if you flip that bad boy over on its back, and you give it a little tilt, you're going to see the, how do you call that? Like that kind of shiny material. And it says on there, security. It says security instrument on it. But you got to hold it at the right angle because it's almost invisible. I can't think of how you call that kind of like shiny print. Technological advances in the internet scanners, color printers, and copiers make it easier to obtain genuine birth certificates and create counterfeit ones. Between 85 and 90% of birth certificate fraud encountered by the Immigration and Naturalization Service and passport staff is the result of birth certificates held by imposters. The most difficult fraud to detect, and federal and state agency staff report receiving only limited training focus on the detection of those fraudulent birth certificates. State practices create opportunities for fraud. It was the consensus of those we interviewed that a number of state practices create opportunities for fraud. Those practices include the following. And we don't really need to get into it, but I just want to give you a general overview anyways, because otherwise we'll be reading this all day. But it's fun stuff. I mean, we should put this up on a link so people can read through it, because it does explain to you that in this current day and age, it wasn't supposed to be for identifiable purposes like it is today. And it says right here again, conclusions, many agencies and organizations request that individuals provide their birth certificates to receive a benefit or service, or to support the issuance of other documents often used for identity purposes, e.g. driver's licenses. However, agencies who rely on birth certificates as a means of establishing identity must understand the limitations of accepting a birth certificate as proof of age, citizenship, or identity. For example, genuine documents obtained with counterfeit birth certificates can be used to obtain genuine birth certificates. Thus, it is inherently illogical to require someone to prove their identity using potentially fraudulent identity documents spawned by false birth certificates in order to obtain a birth certificate. Hear, hear. I can agree with that, huh? But yeah, so this is just a nice kind of definition that you guys can go through to really get a deeper perspective about what the birth certificate process goes through and who's using it and why. I've never seen an OIG report like this before. It's really good. So I'll give you guys the link so you guys can see it for yourself. It's all free. All right. So
well, if you've got these documents, I know some of the documents in your folder you can't share.
I'll figure out how to put them in there. Yeah, I couldn't figure it out, but I'm sure there's a way.
If you can get me the documents you have shareable, I'll put those on the website in a few days as soon as you get it to me, and then that way people will have these same documents. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. Because, yeah, the ones that I couldn't get to, it's just that it's weird. I can't get them to upload, so I'll figure it out. And I don't know why it wouldn't work to begin with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you were saying about the Social Security and how that ties in after the birth, because you fill out the birth certificate and then you fill out the Social Security number after you sign all the contracts.
Right.
So,
and the reason I is because the number has to come later after birth certificate because of the fact that they're securing the child's undertaking. You can't have a Social Security number if nothing was secured, if nothing was undertook. It wouldn't work the other way around. But go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead and ask your question.
No, I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask something. Okay. All right. So this also goes on to tell us how the states work cooperatively with the Social Security Administration to establish procedures to issue Social Security numbers to infants at birth. The second inspection was conducted in response to a request from the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration and summarized SSA's efforts to control birth certificate fraud, which included verification of United States Virginia Island birth certificates and assignment of Social Security numbers at birth. In this study, we found the nature and extent of birth certificate fraud relatively unchanged since 1988, and that major weaknesses continue to hamper the reliability of birth certificates as evidence of eligibility for program services and benefits even though some incremental improvements have been made. So what I was telling you before about how they register your birth certificate and record it at Vital Statistics, and then all events of the baby's life will further be recorded at Vital Statistics. And then what they have here now is when they want to give you some sort of program or service, you usually will give them your social security number because no one carries around their birth certificate. All they do after that is they contact the Social Security Administration to verify that a certificate is on file. That's pretty much all they do in services from the state. They don't take the social security number and pass it on from person to person to person. That's not what happens. They only contact them to verify that the child has a birth certificate on file with the registrar. So from that, I think you saw it already in here, the whole point of doing all of the things that they did at the hospital, the contracts and such, is because when they are telling you that they're going to take over the financial management of the child, that means that from behind the scenes, they can qualify the child, a guardian ad litem, a CPS agent can qualify the child for any of those various programs. But when they do that, the providers giving you the services need to get paid. And they do so through the state insurance, or what is called CHIP, C-H-I-P insurance. And they do that because now when they need to claim the child's disability in order to get paid, that child identified number is what they would use. And in order to determine all of this different value of services, you got to have some sort of financial company, right? American Child Support Service Bureau, filed at the SEC. I don't believe that as individuals, we are registered. That's why the certificate of participation is what I believe it is, because a certificate of participation is utilized in private banking, consent and agreements. And they don't have to, when you do banking business or trade business, you don't have to be registered at the SEC, but there has to be a bank doing the business, right? There has to be somebody managing the finance, managing it. And that's where child support services comes in. So at the hospital, after you've done all your stuff, you sign the paternity acknowledgement agreement. And so now you have your financial manager, because what are they doing? They are managing the financial health of the child. So if the child needs to get services paid, who's doing it if it ain't you? Somebody's paying for it. Somebody's assuring that the money that the Fed provided is being dispersed to the providers appropriately. Somebody's making sure that that check gets cut, and it ain't you. So this is where I believe child support enforcement comes into play. And as a participant and someone who is certified to receive the benefits and receive financial help from the government, is the government providing you with child support? If we think about child support, we typically think about it being just dad making payments, and this company monitors dad's payments. We never think about the fact if daddy government promised us they would provide us with our needs and our necessities, does that mean they're supporting us? And if we are qualified for some sort of program, some sort of service that is now not only provided for us, but managed for us as far as getting it claimed for and paid and the money dispersed, does that mean that daddy government, when he gives our child the whatever program, CPS programs, CAMPS programs, is he also supporting the child? I would say it qualifies as child support. Further investigation, child support is actually a financial advisory firm. So you gotta I thought about that after a while. Like, yeah, you gotta have a financial advisor, don't you?
And if I remember correctly, there was a video one time of the Texas attorney general talking about child support on why they were doing what they were doing to families on child support. That wasn't the exact question, but it pertained to that. And he said it's billions of dollars of federal funds, and it all runs through this.
Oh, yeah. Well, as I was saying before, the main corporation that handles a lot of this stuff is a $2.8 billion profiting organization. That's in profits. They also have a foundation, a charitable foundation. So it comes full circle. The people that are providing you with these services are the same people who are managing the finances for the services, are the same people who are getting paid by the company that is profiting off the services. It's crazy.
Now,
It's circular
not trying to change subject, but you said something. You said a charitable foundation.
Yes.
That was a big red flag right there, because in studying trust law, corporations never die, okay? As long as they got their business license, they stay in business.
Yep.
In trust law, a trust can die, okay? You can only create a trust for up to 99 years.
I actually didn't know that.
Unless it is a charitable foundation. So you want to know why it's a charitable foundation? 10-1. That's where the prospectus comes in. If you read the prospectus, you're going to find they talk about distributions, they talk about beneficiaries, they talk about trustees, the Social Security Act of, not Social Security Act, the Trust Indenture Act of 1939. It's a trust, and all that money's going through that trust.
Oh,
now,
absolutely.
We'll get back on track. You just
we could talk about trust law and how it pertains to this, and I could tell you how the money moves and how they exactly why this is all being done in a nutshell. I won't get into details, but the way it works, the way it's doing what it's doing this way, is because the foundation, the charity, gets to give, and then the corporation gets to take, and it's like a circular model that avoids taxes and can provide gifts that sit in a trust account forever and never actually get utilized. So when they don't get utilized, the company basically just hid millions of dollars saying, yeah, we're going to give this to charity, but they never actually give it to charity. But when it sits there for a certain period of time, they can go back and claim what they didn't give to charity. It's crazy. It's a lot of stuff that goes on. But from charity to a tax avoidance is the whole purpose and point of why they set it up this way. It's crazy nuts. All right, so now let's see. Any questions or anything that you want me to answer before we carry on? I know we've been going on for quite some time, and is there anything that anyone brought up that's important to them? Okay, so
if y'all have any questions, unmute yourself and ask before we go on to show how this stuff is being used against us, because now's when we're going to get into the definitions in the Social Security Act, how the courts are really operating, and all of that.
Yeah, so that's your foundation, basically on how the money moves. But now the question is why and how do they want the money, and what are they doing to us to get it? So now that you have given the right or power of attorney to manage financial and medical care, understand that it makes you a dependent. So if there's anything that you cannot do for yourself, if you're hiring someone to do something for you, it means you're dependent upon that person. Dependency is a disability. Okay, and I do talk about it more when it comes to like CPS and children, because I think it's more understandable and clear. But understand this applies to us too as adults. You know, I challenged someone the other day who isn't studied like we are. And I said, give me just one thing that you create on your own and don't need any assistance to create, and do not rely upon any government involvement. Just give me one activity that you can do without some sort of assistance being necessary from a government entity. We couldn't think of any. There's just nothing left. No matter what you're doing, you have to depend on the government. And this is a disability, which is why they promised us they would take care of our necessities, because we're a bunch of disabled. It was because they wanted us to be disabled, not because we were then, but they wanted us to be disabled because if we're dependent upon them, they can do this. That's the whole point of it. So a child with a disability is defined, okay? Child with a disability means a child evaluated in accordance with 300-304 through 300-311 as having an intellectual disability, a hearing impairment, including deafness, a speech or language impairment, a visual impairment, including blindness, a serious emotional disturbance, referred to in this part as emotional disturbance, and basic other stuff that you should already understand, but we'll go through the whole thing. Health impairment, specific learning disabilities. So what happens next is then they need special education and related services to special education. So an emotional disturbance, serious emotional disturbance, is listed in the medical books. And from that, it explains to you that even a parent going through a divorce has caused for the child to experience a serious emotional disturbance in their life. Have a list of criteria. So in order to consider a child to have an emotional disturbance, it's like a list of 6 things. If you're going through a divorce court, the child meets at least 2 automatically. If you're in CPS, the child's going to meet at least 4. So this now they make a determination, or they evaluate that particular criteria to determine how much of a disturbance the child has experienced. So there's 4 levels. If the child meets 2 of the criteria, it would be a lower level of disability. If they meet 4 of the criteria inside of that, it would be a major emotional disturbance, therefore leading to a more challenging impairment. So if you're in divorce court, you're not walking out of there with everybody being disabled, put it that way. And it is necessary. They need this disability to exist, because this is when they can now say that there is a dependency issue and the people involved are in need of services from the government. And the services that they need will be provided by the government by necessity as payment to what the government owes us. So now they have to give us those services in order to help us increase our ability to independently operate in this particular realm by ourselves without them. So they have to correct our behavior. They have to make us feel better. And that's why they give us these services, or correctional services, is in order to make sure that we are able to heal and better behave so that we can participate in society freely without any kind of impairment on our liberty. So the goal here is really not to lock anyone up. Don't institutionalize anyone. Let's do what we can to keep them free.
And we were discussing this earlier today. If you want to see the behavior they're trying to change, go read the psychological journals or the news articles that are posted, we'll say in the New York Times, that was written by some psychologist. And you see how they push certain things on families. That's what they're trying to change, is the direction of the country on what is acceptable and what is not. Is that basically what it is?
Yeah, but the problem with this theory is who decides it. You have a panel of experts, right? So perhaps at some point, a psychologist, psychiatrist group from a university did some analytics to see what it looks like throughout a divorce. What kind of emotional disturbances does a child have? And at what point does it accumulate to being a disability that leads to dependency? So this is who's deciding this, these professors or professionals that are in the university doing these types of studies. And the government relies upon those experts to determine what it looks like before we can say, okay, child is in need. And it is minimum. The child is in need with barely anything happening there, that according to these so-called experts. But the problem with them using these experts and putting them on these committees is that they're picking and choosing which expert opinion they want to use. Because one expert might think that a child is a disabled after it meets 2 criteria on that list, and another 20 experts may say that's insane. They need to at least hit 5 of those criteria before you can consider them to be disabled. So rather than summing up all the different experts' opinions, they're going to choose which expert is more beneficial to them. Because the more dependency they create, the more lucrative the game. And so that's what those committees are that you see in Congress. Those are a bunch of experts that are making decision on our behalf based on what we need, and they're deciding what the bar is for us to become needy or visually needy in a way that they have to intervene. That's what those committees.
Now, let me interject something right here. That email I sent you, did you save that document on the Code of Federal Regulations where they define child care services?
Oh, I'm sure it's in here somewhere. Let me see.
If it'll be easier for me to pull it up, I can pull it up and share it.
It'll be likely in my email somewhere. Do you remember what the title of it was?
Give me 1 second, I'll tell you. But it's not like I ever delete any important emails. So let me go to my sent folder. Not that one. What email did I use?
Is it under definitions? 48 CFR?
Yes, that one right there. Now, look at that second paragraph, everyone, because what she's explaining, now this is under the Federal Acquisitions Regulations. And I think my friend Joseph, he's the one that found this and sent it to me. But if you read the definition of child care services, it says child care services means child protective services, including the investigation of child abuse and neglect reports, social services, health and mental health care, child daycare, education, whether or not directly involved in teaching. So education doesn't have to be in teaching.
Oh, no.
Foster care, residential care, recreational or rehabilitative programs, and detention, correctional, or treatment services. That y'all have heard, if y'all have been researching long enough, you have heard the cradle, as in the schools are set up to teach you to be an inmate in jails. Why do you think now child care services? Who do they put in prisons? Young adults or what they call juveniles, and how many times do they want to charge them as an adult? That's all what they call child care services. So this is what she's explaining.
Exactly. And it's synonymous. Department of Education, Department of Correction go hand in hand together. They're the same department, basically. Ultimately, an evaluation occurs to determine if you have some sort of social inability. So if I don't like the way you're behaving, let's say, for example, your entire community inside of the box, they are all under the belief that we should be polite to each other and say please and thank you. I might be an introvert and I never say please or thank you simply because I'm shy. If an officer or an agent observes that about me, he can now say that I am outside of the social norm, and therefore there must be something wrong with me because I don't do the same things that my community are doing or behave the same way that my community is behaving. So something must be wrong. This alerts the agent, aka officer, right, to now pay closer attention to me. So he's going to examine me or evaluate me. And from his evaluation and observations of my strange behavior, he will put them in a system. And inside of that system, it will explain to anyone who reads it that he's seen me not acting like everyone else. I didn't say please and thank you. A couple of months from now, a year from now, I might come across someone else who also notes the system that, okay, something's wrong with her. She doesn't say please and thank you the way all of us believe you should. And that adds up, and it adds up to different agencies, agents, schools, employers. So to the point where they can eventually say, you have antisocial behavioral issues. It's really simple and it doesn't take much. And if you have an antisocial issue, they want to help you with that. They want to help you fix that problem. So they'll give you government services to help correct that problem. It's very scary because it's so, there cannot be a person on this planet who doesn't have a defined disability. It can't possibly be, except for the people sitting in seats of Congress, maybe. They're worse than any of us.
That's where the DSM-5 came out. And now, if you breathe, you've got a mental disorder based on the DSM-5. I mean, some people may think that me saying that is taking it to the extreme, but if you really think about it, they classify in the DSM-5 everything that you would think is a disability. If you don't trust government, you have occupation, you have a, what is it? Not occupational defiance disorder, but it's something defiance disorder.
Yeah,
it begins with an O.
Yeah,
so that gives them the ability. Yeah, that gives them the ability to classify all of us as disabled.
Well, that's the point of it. Is this is meant to change your thinking. This is re-education. Where you are sitting in re-education camp as a resident at that dang hospital that you signed all that paperwork for. You're a resident. What does residencies do? If you're a doctor in a residency, what are you doing? You're learning from a higher knowledgeable educator. That's what it's for. That's why we live in communities, or AKA communes, right? So your county and all of that, they conduct research on you in order to determine what your customary practices are within each scope of your life. And then they determine what the norm looks like. And if you don't fit into the norm, we got to fit you in. We have to change the way you think so that you do fit in with everyone else, that you do believe the same thing. And that's the whole thing about it being under Department of Education. It's creepy, scary, but it kicked in, from what I can tell, it kicked in hardcore in the 50s when they enacted the, what was it? The program, some program, appropriations thing. I can't remember. It basically what it is economic sustainability and growth for a nation. And it talks about how they're going to disperse all the money to increase the wealth of the nation in order to sustain our economy. And basically, it's about how they're going to manage the people to accomplish that. And that's what this is. People are regulated. Each of your identifiable occupations in life are regulated. And if you can't meet the criteria set forth in the regulation, like the rest of the people, then we have to pluck you out of there and fix this problem so that we don't have to incarcerate you. That's the judge's job.
Now you're talking about judges here, but judges, what we're going into is not a court. We all know that. We've all been studying. We've been told it's an admiralty court system. We've been told all these different things. But you actually are saying it's not, right? It's something else.
Well, we know it. If you think of what happens when does somebody evaluate your behavior? If we're talking about parenting, if we're talking about getting a ticket for traffic issues that no injury or harm was done, is it not then therefore a behavioral issue? If you're talking to me about my child and say, oh, well, you have been negligent in your duty of care towards the child, you didn't do what you're supposed to, that would mean that my behavior is at bar. Am I wrong? Can't really get around it if you think about it that way.
I understand that, but I guess you didn't understand what I was asking. You were saying that these courts are not courts.
No.
That they are. That's what I. Yeah, and you said that was defined under Title IV.
Yeah. Facility means.
Now read that, y'all. Read that for yourself. Now go ahead and you can go ahead and read it though.
Facility means an entity that received assistance under Title IV of the Act and provided a community service assurance. Community service assurance.
Now Title IV, we know what Title IV is. What is that title?
I'm not sure what this one is yet. I haven't had a chance to dig into it. Maybe somebody else knows. I'm not sure. I have so much to study. Someone out there, look it up. But yeah. So any facility that's receiving the Title IV funds is any of the courts we're in. So that's why I didn't really look that up, because I already know. And when they talk about community service assurance, this falls under the category of community-based participatory interventions. So when you deal with a cop and then you get offered SWAT services or some sort of plea deal, this is what's considered to be a community service. Okay, so as the community service is provided to you, the judge also gives you a community service under community. It's actually called community judging. So when we're talking about social behavior and correctional services or social services that can be referred to you by the court, this is what they're referring to right here. So your judge might say, okay, well, we're not going to give you the full sentence and, we're going to cut you a break and we're going to give you probation. That's a referral to an assured community service. Brokerage. That's all it is. If you think about when you get in front of the judge, do they not brokerage services all day long? Every courtroom, I don't care which one you've ever been in.
And what does CPS or DSS or DCF, depending on your state, what do they constantly do? They're trying to get you to sign a contract.
Oh, yeah, because it's mandatory.
A service, some kind of service agreement. Hey, go see this mental health doctor. Go see this or that. Jump through all these hoops. Now, that's going to be important here shortly. But go on.
Yeah. So mental health court professional mediator of the mental health court team, including but not limited to a judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, probation officer, coordinator, treatment provider, or peer recovery coach. So even your defense attorney is conducting an evaluation of your social behavioral health. All of this goes into a report. And from that report, it's supposed to or remain sealed until trial. But either way you slice it, if I am getting in front of you and you're my judge, and you open up a report that tells you from 5 different people you trust that they have witnessed me being defiant, depressed, speaking to people who weren't there, are you going to give me a fair and meaningful hearing now?
No.
Kind of an impossibility, ain't it?
Well, not
But
only
this is what's
that,
happening.
if you are standing up for your rights, now I couldn't tell you what it was earlier, but I got a text that said it was oppositional defiance disorder. So if you're sitting up there trying to defend your rights and you're not going along with the program.
Exactly. Re-education camp, friends. So what is a service provider? Any mental health or developmental disability facility. And what did we say a facility was? Anybody taking IVD funding. So anybody who is helping you with mental health, anybody who is helping you with a developmental process, correction, or rehabilitation, they are considered to be a service provider. So if the court is a service provider mental health facility, how the heck is it a judicial branch of court? I don't see it. I can't figure it out for the life of me. And if you tell me that they don't provide these services, you can't convince me that they don't. There's no way. And I can show you as we go along that they do, in fact, accept IVD funds, the court itself under community adjudication. They accept access to justice funds. These are all Title IV program funds. Your attorney accepts them. The public defender accepts those funds, all of it under the access to justice. So what else can they be? There's no other excuse they can make to tell us they are not what I'm saying they are. There's no way around it. Unless someone else has something to bring forth, let me know, because to me, I'm convinced. But you know, I have a social disability, so you might not want to listen to me. These treatment efforts, right? So I want you to think about this for just a second. If I am offering you a service because we have decided that you are in need, who in the heck says you have to take the services that I have to offer? Why can't you get services? Oh, you're right. You deemed me dependent. You're correct. I'm in need. But I'm going to skip your services and I'm going to go get my own. You're still getting the correctional help they desire to give. You're just exercising your free right to choose whom you want to receive it from. And I can't find anything that tells me I can't make that decision, not thus far. As a matter of fact, I keep finding opposite of that, where we have rights to choose our medical providers. Mm-hmm. So if we don't want to use their stinky providers, talk about bleeding them out or draining the swamp. Because right now, the court is a sales tactical service brokerage firm. And this is where your CRIS funds or CRIS securities come from. Because when we're conducting sales business, we have to develop what is called a pipeline of opportunity. So we can say Jane Doe qualifies for at least 5 different services, and in that 5 different services, it would end up being, if we sold her all 5, it would end up being about $20,000. But we also know we can't expect to sell her 100% of all of those offerings. So this is where the securitization process comes from when we're talking about case securities. So now that we know we have what is called a pipeline of opportunity with Jane Doe for 20 grand, we can rely upon the fact that we are going to sell her at least bare minimum 10% of that particular package. So what we will do is we are going to promise our investors that we will sell $2,000 worth of services in this particular case. And that's the goal. That becomes the sales objective. And the sales closer, if they do not close the deal, are now considered to be, what's the word, a breach of a business contract. Because every opportunity that comes to the door has to be completely, what do you call it? You have to make every attempt to close the deal, or you get fired.
Well, that's just like, that is no different than when it came out that the states were making contracts with the private prisons to keep them at 95+% full. They had to keep them at a minimum of 90% capacity, every bed in the private prison.
Absolutely.
So,
That's
and if they didn't, pipeline. Yep, if they didn't, those corporations could sue for breach of contract and sue for that money they've lost. So now when you think of what we've discussed so far, why do you think they're dragging people into courts that have never harmed or injured anyone? All for things they say is wrong because some person passed a code.
It's risk management. So state insurance is what is called a supplemental overlay of insurance. So if we can tap the state insurance for rehabilitation purpose or medical prevention, think about it that way. Many insurances have now invested in prevention by giving women mammograms, by doing certain tests that they invest in order to prevent having to pay bigger amounts of money in the future because they just didn't check and catch it early on, or early intervention, right? This is the same time.
Now you're talking about providers. Someone asked a question.
Sure.
And it's a logical question.
Good, like this.
Wonder if there's a list of approved providers.
Yes, absolutely there is. They actually operate under an insurance network. So depending on the category, if we're talking families and children, it's called Children's Alliance Network. Children's Alliance Network is a network of approved providers that have agreed to accept state insurance in exchange for their social services to children and families. Just like Blue Cross and Blue Shield networks, it works the same way. But we have that CHIP insurance is what it's called, CHIP, and each state has a different name for it. Here in Illinois, it's called All Kids. In Tennessee, it's called TennCare. That's CHIP insurance, money that goes to fund the needs of a child, and that's how it works behind the scenes. So if the child is needy and dependent and determined to have a disability, and mom and dad have been determined to not be able to meet said need, they're not paying attention, they're having their own problems, and this child is emotionally suffering and they're not doing anything about it, right? That's why the child is dependent.
Now we were discussing, you were saying, now I know she's primarily talking about children. In other words, real common law definition of the term minor, someone that is
this applies to adults too.
This does apply to adults too. Now, the trick of the game is this. Now, if you are in a, we'll say, family court, because a lot of people that got into this is because of family court. Now, when you sign those contracts we discussed at the very beginning, you agreed to go to family court. Okay, that family court is the one that's controlling. So, because you consented and because you agreed to take part in all of these services, And needless to say, it was not by your knowledge per se. But when you were in a courtroom proceeding, because how many of you have been said, hey, jump through these hoops, do this, do that, do the other? This happened. What happens when they actually go up into court and then they say, you proved that you did everything, but then they turn around and say, lie to the judge and say you didn't do anything? The judge sides with them no matter how much proof you give them. What is the deal with that?
That's so deliberate. Okay, so it's hard to explain to people who don't have at least a contract 101 experience. So feel free, peoples, if I lose you here, make sure to ask for clarification, because this is actually really important. When a service is offered to you, it is an offer. So if you understand how to stay in honor when an offer is made, this is very relevant, okay? So the purpose of the judge is to avoid incarceration by any means necessary. This is why they offer correctional services. So we don't want to take you and put you into a cell. So we'll offer you different plea options, right? If you continuously receive or refuse each and every offer, you fall into dishonor. And the court can now say, we've done everything in our power to avoid incarceration, but this person is not accepting our offer to rehabilitate, and therefore the only other option left is to incarcerate. And this also applies to
even if it's not in incarceration, we're talking about strictly, we'll say it's a neglect case. That means there's most likely no criminal charges.
No.
Why do they do what they do when they lie about the parents? Because you were saying that if they get up there and say you refuse these services or you didn't do them, even though usually the mother is the one that generally will do them because out of fear and everything else, they get up there and lie and say you didn't, or you didn't do them properly, because now they get more money for continuing to control the child?
Yes. So if they can put you into a place where they can make it appear as though you're not cooperative or uncooperative in refusing services or whatever the case may be, there's two reasons why they like it so much. Number one, it demonstrates that mom or dad is further disabled. It's more money on insurance to collect for the dippies that, the social disabled. Number two, it's because the more dependent the child becomes, or the more dependency needs the child has, the more services they can qualify them for, the more money they're going to make. Okay. But when mom refuses to do those services, it creates a debt. And that debt becomes the obligation of the United States. So when that debt is created behind the scenes, that is an asset to your agency, where they get to bank it because now the United States owes it, and it's a write-off on taxes. So they're in really great shape if they can put that in as a debt. But that's kind of detailed. So, but ultimately, they would also have to then do their job. So CPS, they have one job and one job alone. And they are supposed to act as a liaison to give services that would ultimately heal the family's problems in order to end up reunifying the family. Now, if they don't want reunification to happen because it's lucrative to adopt and all those other things, then they're going to do what they can to throw a monkey wrench in it to prevent mom or dad from, being able to complete the process, because then they have no choice but to reunify. So this leaves them with two excuses. Number one, they no longer have an obligation to service mom, but they already get paid for it anyway. If mom is not in honor with her contract, CPS loses nothing they're still going to get paid out of the state insurance for what they've done, but they no longer have an obligation to mom anymore, and they can drop her from the picture and just go along whatever they want to do. They don't have to include her anymore. So now when they're doing that, they can make further decisions for the kids without actually including mom in any of the parenting plans or anything else. Gives them full control to qualify the children for additional programs, and eventually sever the relationship where they can get foster care and adoption money. So there's a lot of reasons as to why they'll do that. And now with this Family First Act coming into play, this is exactly how they're going to play the game. They're supposed to be reunifying families or giving services that keep families together now. But what they're going to start doing, I believe, is we're going to start seeing more of this, more of, oh, well, mom didn't complete services, or, she keeps testing up positive for drugs. Keep in mind, before you throw the stone at someone, we found that these drug tests are actually also from Maximus Inc. The company is also attached to Maximus. So again, it's a whole circular thing with the money. But we found that there's two problems with these drug tests. Number one, if you receive results from a hair follicle exam in particular, it should be coming into your hands in the protected PDF file format so that it can't be altered or changed. In this particular case, it was a Word format. Was it changed? Who knows? I can't tell you because it wasn't protected, but it's not supposed to come in that way. It's inadmissible in evidence when it comes that way. And the other thing is that we couldn't find a chain of custody. So CPS submits the hair follicle to a, a chemistry place, whatever. And they don't do hair follicle tests. So what they do is they contract a third party, send that hair follicle to the third party, and then that third party does the test, sends it back to them, and then they send it back to CPS. You can't find a chain of custody in that. You can't see where FedEx dropped off, picked up, and then back again. So these hair follicle exams, if anyone's out there listening and has had to deal with this very thing, this is what you should be looking for. Because I found it in 2 cases. But, again, it doesn't matter because they're going to find every reason to say some sort of service was not complete or that mom or dad failed at their obligation in said service because it's very lucrative. Very lucrative indeed. Does that answer your question pretty clearly?
Yes. Now, you were going to get into Maximus Inc., and I know we may not have enough time to go into that because we got 20 minutes till 10 o'clock. So, and I know we started late, so we may run over, if that's fine with y'all.
Yeah, but actually, I might have you read the next document that I'm going to bring up. I'm going to have you read it to them because I need to take a break and I need to get the dog out. Like I said, my dog's been sick. So I'm not trusting him for very long periods of time right now. If that's okay with you, sir.
Oh, that is fine. So you want me to read the next section while you take them out?
Yeah, I'm actually going to bring up something specific for you to read, and I'll just give you a little breakdown. I don't know if I gave this to you. I think I did, if I remember correctly, if I could find it now. Where did I take this from? Hold on. There it is. Okay, so in this segment, I kind of want to really wrap your head around data trade, data collection. What this is a trade partner agreement. So when we talked about Children's Alliance Network, having a network of providers that were all on board with accepting state insurance for the medical and mental health issues or needs of a child. What happens next is they will sign these trade partner agreements where all the different agencies will agree to exchange information about your family and these aren't just in family court now. This is also when it comes to any type of task force that is created to conduct a certain mission. So if you think about anytime you hear them talking about, we created a task force on crime control. If there's a task force on crime control, there is a trade partner agreement. between agencies that are going to exchange information about the people. So this particular one is a family, but there are several of these out there. For every time you hear the word task force, you can find a trade partner agreement. This one is not a signed one. I thought I pulled the signed one, but I guess I didn't. All right. Poop. Okay, so some of these words you're not going to understand. TCMIS, value add networks, clearinghouses, things like that. Each state has its own name system. Sometimes they're unified and sometimes they're not. But like I said, TennCare is the system they use to track mom and dad, right? Or to track the child. And that particular system is for insurance claims. So, I think I'm trying to find a good place for you to start reading so I can super quick take a break. I feel bad, guys. Sorry. But I have a sick puppy.
Now, does anyone have any questions while she takes a minute to take care of her dog?
I mean, yeah, this is probably a good place for you to start because it explains about medical agencies and the systems. This is where I began understanding how this stuff works, because I was able to identify all the different data systems that they're utilizing in order to conduct these research projects. So understanding a little bit more about them, and then I'm going to take just a few minutes here. When I come back, if you have any questions about it or if any of these things didn't make sense, let me know, because this is actually a really good insight to understand these people are in the business of data trade, personal informational data trade about you and your kids in order to pre-investigate you or invade your privacy and not have to worry about the whole unlawful search and seizure thing. It's what this is all for. But we'll be right back with you guys in just a minute, okay? Carry on reading from here. Division of TennCare. TennCare being the state insurance, and I'll be back in a minute, okay?
Okay.
Lots of
So it
interest
says the
stuff, for real.
division. No, go ahead. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just saying lots of interesting stuff, for real. I mean, there's definitely a paper trail that's kind of blowing away.
Yes, it is. And I know your notebook is filling up, isn't it?
Well, I've got quite a few different notes.
Can I add
Let's
something?
see here. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Joseph. I just, you guys were mentioning earlier about the process of keeping up the records. You can, after the age of majority, go to the hospital and get the records. But after that, after the, as I put in there, the public law act that was done in 96 and so on, 104-208, they redefined you as a vehicle definition, as a vessel. And so that all the records from then on are kept at the DMV. Just wanted you to know that, and your birth date. I just wanted to interject that.
Well, it's not your delivery is wrong, Joseph.
Right.
When you say you're talking about the body. No,
Yeah.
It is not the body. Okay, it is not the man and woman. You are the registered agent. Okay, so this is where me and her have a slight disagreement and an agreement, if you can understand that.
So
she sees the birth certificate as a certificate of participation. In other words, you have made an agreement to take part in their process of being able to fund the government. Okay? So when I played the video at the beginning where it says that, where the guy said on the registered agent that some call it a birth certificate. So, okay. That is the agency. Okay. So you were in possession of state property because that long form was created by the state. You're in possession of it. You are representing it as under the laws of agency. You are the registered agent for service of process, for all that goes with it. Okay. So you made that, well, in your situation, you didn't, because you was not there at the birth, but the average person was. The mother consented and signed the prenatal contracts and the hospital's birthing plan that says, yes, I'm going to, for lack of better terms, give you my child. I will maintain custody as the guardian, but the hospital takes the records, gives it to the state. The state says, well, we have to provide for this child because the parents can't, because the parents are no longer around. That's why if you look in the codes, only thing pertaining to the birth certificate in most every state is only dealing with a lost infant or a foundling. In other words, a child that was lost. You can verify that at one state that I know by heart, and that's KRS 213.051. That's the Kentucky Revised Statute. Okay. And it's called contents of the birth certificate. Almost every state, 2/3 of the state, roundabout, have almost identical verbiage as Kentucky's. You will not find a code in most states anywhere else dealing with the birth certificate when it comes to the biological parents. It's always a lost infant or a foundling. So you are turning the child over to the state. The state says, okay, we're bankrupt. We need to be able to provide for said child, right? And when you saw the definition of minor, what was the definition of minor? Even after you turn 18, you're still a minor. Yeah, you're incompetent.
Well, that's, it stands to reason. You're right. We didn't know about it till we know about it. So that's, they don't want us to keep us in the dark about all that stuff. We're indoctrinated to not know until you know. But that's, my mom sued me too, and she still thinks I'm lying about it. So.
Well, the reason you're going to find people that's going to say, no, there's no way, because why? You were indoctrinated to think a certain way. Studying law, I started understanding separation of powers and how the states were separate from D.C. And what did they start doing in the 1950s? You can find the videos on YouTube where they were putting subliminal messages in the videos that would play the American our anthem, okay? Because if you're old enough to remember back in the day, at the end of the television broadcast, which was around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and the TVs would go silent, okay? At the end of the day, it would be they would play that, right? Let's see here.
Of course, we had to do it in school every morning when I was growing up. So yeah, that too.
So they got caught putting subliminal messages in that, telling you to do things. You see, back in the day, it was you could be a U.S. citizen or a state citizen until the 14th Amendment, and then the 14th Amendment or U.S. citizen became the prominent citizenship, okay? And in the court cases have said you can be one or the other or both.
You can be state or faculty.
So what they've done is they set up a system to where the United States doesn't have to pay its debt. They get you to do it. They get you to do it by taking part in the system. And a lot of times it is against our will because we were never told this stuff. I figure 1.4 there is very interesting. The state owns the data in the TCMIS and operates the system in which the claims and eligibility data flow. So the state owns the data that you are putting in this system. If you don't own it and the state owns it, the state's a corporation. Unless you get into the U.S. code and then you find that state is defined as D.C. and its insular possessions. It's not defined as what we think of as a state.
Yeah, exactly. That's why me and you have talked about the assumed business name in North Carolina, or the fictitious business name, wherever that pertains to, wherever you're at in the birth state. And registering your name's only yours till 5 years. You have to register a DBA as your special agent, occupant, whatever.
So
Hey,
hold
Maximus.
on, Joseph. What's going on, Parker? What you got?
Hey, yeah, she was talking about, getting the paternity tested and the hair follicle, and, to me, following that chain of title or whatever, and who's handling the product is utmost important. But I saw something really interesting here several years ago on TV, back when I used to watch TV.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought they had found Jesse James' burial site. They thought they had his grave. And they wanted to, one, they wanted to exhume the body, and then two, they wanted to test it to see if it was really him or not. And I found it fascinating that in order to figure out if that was really Jesse James or not, their requirement was that they needed 2 females from his side of the family in order to determine if it was him or not, because they had to test the mitochondrial DNA. And I'm going, whoa, wait a minute here. Because they're giving guys mouth swabs all the time and stuff and turning around like Maury Povich and saying, yeah, you are the father. But back with the situation here a couple years ago with Jesse James, they needed to test the females on the side of his family to determine if it was him or not. So wouldn't that mean that technically, if they want to find out if you're the baby daddy or not, they really need your mom or your sister or your aunt instead of you?
No.
That is actually a good point. That is a possibility. But the reason they're doing the paternity test is it goes back to what she's saying. The child is a dependent. Now go back to the bankruptcy of 1933. What did they have to do? They had to get us to accept it, right? Now they are responsible for providing all the necessities, okay? Now, if they have to provide all the necessities and they don't want to foot the bill, what do they got to do? They got to stick it with someone else, so they get a paternity test. So now you've got a responsible parent that is supposed to pay child support. Now, yeah, we know the Supreme Court has ruled child support collections by the state is unconstitutional. That is irrelevant to this grand scheme of things. They need you to keep paying the money because why? They want those federal funds. Those federal funds is how the states are paying their bills. The income tax ain't doing it. The income tax goes to pay the Federal Reserve for the money they print. It doesn't even pay the interest. That's according to the Grace Commission report. So the income tax is not what people think.
Yeah,
So
I'm going to interject on that. Don't ever make the mistake in believing that your tax dollars pay the agent's salaries. They don't. I hear people say that a lot, like the cops. Oh, our tax dollars pay you. That's the furthest thing from the truth. I don't know if one time maybe we did pay them, but I can promise you that right now, as of today, we are not their payer.
No, we're not. The only reason they're getting a salary is because there's paper notes called Federal Reserve notes being printed. And sooner or later, those printers are going to shut off.
Brian.
Because you can't print that much money. You cannot print forever when there's nothing backing it. So I did see something, though. I did see something interesting, and I commented on it. 1.4 in the purpose and background. It says the state owns the data.
Mm-hmm.
I found that rather interesting because if you look up the states in most corporate databases, what are they? They're corporations. What are they in the business for? Making a profit. So what do? They go sell that information.
Oh yeah.
They're going to give it to their agencies, insurance companies, etc.
Yeah, it's all hand-me-downs and trade. I mean, the way I view it, to make it simple, is that we really are operating in a barter system. There's nothing of value to exchange. So when we turn 18, we enter into the labor force. And the first thing we do is we give our social security number to our employer, who will evaluate how we perform on our job. And then they will keep those evaluations on file and share them with IRS and various other agencies. This is a behavioral tracking system, how you perform your job and what you're worthy of and what your value is. And that's why we increase your pay if you're very valuable, so that, okay, if you could do the bare minimum and we'll give you your necessity house. But if you go above and beyond, it would not be equitable to give those who go above and beyond a big house, or a little house, if they're not all doing the same type of work. So your salary increases demonstrate that, okay, you probably are better average than an average worker, and therefore equitably you should be entitled a little bit more than just necessity. That's kind of how I look at it. And that means that by execution of contract. So once you have given that social security number, you turned 18, got that first job, you basically executed the social compact of the social security entitlements enactment, because you actually received a benefit, meaning that you have gotten protections. So you're dependent upon the government while you're working for these people, because the government is going to make sure you're treated fairly and equitably. So you're receiving a benefit right out the gate when you turn 18, and that executes a contract. That's kind of how I envision it, at least, to simplify.
Well, now the picture that come to my mind was this. If you are what you started off explaining, if you are, we'll just say poor. Now, the government has to provide your necessities. So what do? They put you in government housing because they have to provide you a house. But if you are well off, Now, Mr. Parker's mentioned this twice, so write this down if you're unfamiliar with it. It's called Foreign Acquisition Registration Matrix. But if you are well off in your family line, they think you're going to go to college, you're going to get this big degree, what do? They put you on a credit score system to let you buy a house, because why? Through buying the house, you're going to give up your wealth. You see what I'm saying? So it's still, no matter which way you look at it, it is a transfer of wealth. And it's away from the people to the banks, the government, and agencies.
Yeah, it gets so complicated and sticky. I mean, in the end, everything comes down to economic sustainability and growth. So the government's duty, what they're instituted to do, is to grow the wealth of the nation to the point where they can establish independence, economic independence. And then that way we remain sovereign if we have said independence economically, right? And when we reach that point where we've obtained or accumulated all this wealth, now we also have power. And as a powerful nation, we get to set the stage on how we want things to go around the world. And we also have a place in this world where people won't mess with us because we have such a strong power and presence. But each citizen, right, has the obligation to contribute to the health and growth of the nation. Economic health, economic growth.
Now, and that means even if they want to put you in prison, they can.
Yeah, you're still valuable in there. Maybe more so. Probably more so valuable to them, because I don't know if they still do it, but like, I know for a while they were doing like, make your license plates for 20 cents an hour. So clearly it's lucrative. I don't think they do that anymore though, if I remember correctly, but they still do prisoner research programs though. So while you're in prison, remember you have no rights. And so they will conduct experiments on the prisoners that have no rights. They do it all day long and they make a lot of money, because when they do these kinds of experiments, they now get their university buddies to conduct a forensic analysis of the information, develop a profile of that particular group, and a conclusion in science as to, what experiment was applied and how it ended up and what the outcome of all the prisoners was. They sell those law journals, medical journals. They get huge accolades, better careers when they write them. And then that information is sold to China, Russia, everywhere, in order for everyone to basically take or participate in economic sustainability and equality around the world. That's the whole point of doing all this, is for the whole world peace mission. I mean, everything that I'm telling you here, you can tie into Agenda 2030. So the economic sustainability goals requires them to change the way we behave so that we treat our environment better. That's all it's for, as far as, maintaining a control or maintaining the peace and order of things. So if you look at the broken window theory, what that explains to us is that if there's a broken window in a neighborhood, it appears as though the neighborhood people don't care about the neighborhood, and therefore they will experience a higher level of crime, because when one window is broken, it will lead to many windows getting broken because of the lack of caring within that area. This is why this is about when all this starts. So CPS, police officers, they do not do anything to protect anybody. It's not their job, nor is it their duty or obligation. They are only there to maintain order and peace by giving people the appearance of safety. So CPS is only giving the appearance that the state is looking into child abuse and somehow saving children from child abuse in order to keep the people quiet. Because if the people start to see child abuse and no criminal action being taken and no one getting persecuted, they start to become civilly unrested. And a civilly unrested neighborhood it starts to spread. And when that starts to spread, we cannot maintain the order of things. So we have to keep the peace by giving the people the appearance of peace, because it'll keep them peaceful. And that's the broken window theory that breaks that down. That's why the police don't protect individuals from injury or harm, because what they're really doing is they're giving people a feeling. So all that money we're paying now, for, to keep these guys looking good, it's only to give us a certain kind of feeling. Because back in the day, in the 70s, during like the time where the Black communities were starting to get very angry with the police because they felt that they were neglected in comparison to the white people, right? So during that time, they were yelling and screaming, but nobody was hearing them. So they created the beat specifically for those neighborhoods. And it meant that the police officers would walk through the neighborhood and actually have a social relationship with the people therein in order to make them feel like the police department was doing something. And what they discovered is that most of the problem was coming from elderly people. These elders would go to the store and see, say, a bunch of teenagers outside yelling, screaming, laughing, playing, whatever. And they would feel afraid. They would call the police, and the police would have to say to them, ma'am, there's nothing going on here. They're not doing anything wrong. I can't arrest them. But then what would happen is these little elder people would come together and complain that these little young whippersnappers are causing them harm, but there was no arrestable offense. And instead of taking care of it in an honest way, they saw an opportunity. So they put more people, more police on the beat in order to maintain the peace in the neighborhood by keeping the elderly quiet. And then they started breaking up the groups of teenagers by utilizing fear that the teenagers could get arrested so that they could get them off the street to keep the elderly quiet. In the end, studies showed it didn't reduce crime in the neighborhood at all. It did nothing other than keep everybody peaceful in order to save face, because the police didn't want everyone else thinking that they were neglecting that particular neighborhood. So they just kept the lie going. That's kind of where all of this concept came from. And it spread like wildfire after that, obviously, because I'm talking, this is like later 70s that this happened. And look where we are today. It's pretty bad.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know we're not going to be able to explain a lot, but I know you found a lot on a corporation called Maximus Inc. And we'll probably have to finish that on the next episode. But
Yeah,
can you give us a precursor of how this ties to these different corporations and how they are tied to the courts and making money off of us?
So Maximus is a business management acquisitions company. And they also have acquired what are called software as service businesses, right? So what they have done in a nutshell is they have monopolized anything to do with claims involving Medicaid. So they create like the network I was telling you about, Children's Alliance Network and all of that. They actually are the ones who procure or solicit the service of all these different social healthcare providers that are going to be dealing with you. And now that they've hired those people who've accepted, that they'll take the insurance from the state, the next thing those people have to do is they have to create a team specific to each individual family or whatever. That team operates, you might have a social worker, a psychologist, you might have a clinical social worker, someone who keeps the minutes, all these different people, this team, right? All working because they make their paycheck from Maximus. Then what happens next is they state a claim against the insurance. So they put it to the billing department, the billing gets codified, and that goes to the state to get paid off insurance. Those people are also paid by Maximus. So before the claim gets approved, the company who accepts it in and analyzes it and approves or denies it, also Maximus. So there's no way out of it. Why the judges and everybody else is relative to this is because your states are shareholders in this company. So the state's Treasury Department and the state's pension boards have shares of this corporation. So what that tells us is that these employees of the state are reliant upon the success of Maximus stock because it's going to be their paycheck and it's going to be their pension. So if Maximus isn't successful, in making as many claims against state insurance for dependents as possible, then their pensions are going to shrink and their paychecks may not flow, because it all comes full circle back to that particular company. Again, though, it's not just Maximus. I use them because they're the biggest one, but this is how I'm simplifying it so that you understand it. Maximus is both, or not both, it's all things. It creates some of the nonprofit organizations such as Children's Alliance from its trust. Okay, so Maximus has a trust, and from that they created the foundation that creates all these different nonprofit organizations that service you throughout your cases for whatever purpose. And then they also procure all the different professionals that will provide you services through their various companies. And then they pay the people who make the decisions on whether or not their claims are going to be put through. They have been caught up in many, many lawsuits over the years. So this is not a secret to the state. This is not somehow, oh, well, does everybody know this? Yes, there's no way they don't. There have been so many claims against this company.
Hey, I did a search on Westlaw for Maximus Inc. Now, I have not went in and viewed them all, but here's what it says on Westlaw. 873 cases. Trial court orders, 95. Statutes and court rules where Maximus Inc. is mentioned in the notes, 16. Regulations, 2. And when it says regulations, it's not that Maximus Inc. is in the regulations. It was a court decision revolving around said regulation. 266 administrative decisions and guidance.
Yep.
8 of them under practical law. Practical law is maintained by law firms. Secondary sources, 656, where Maximus Inc. is discussed. 3 forms, and these are what I'm reading is on the overview. It breaks it down by different things on Westlaw if you're familiar with it. But there's a case involving Maximus where something is there. So you got 452 briefs, 1,797 trial court documents, 57 expert materials, 6 jury verdicts and settlements, proposed adopted regulations 1, and 8 arbitration materials. Maximus is busy.
Yeah, and I actually found a lot of private cases. So I don't know if that goes into Westlaw when they're private or not. So whatever Westlaw has, there's probably more if private judging wasn't a part of some of the actions against them.
Well, that depends on what you classify as private cases. If you're talking about arbitration cases, here's one. Los Angeles Unified School District was the claimant against Maximus, and Maximus, Harris Educational Consulting, done a counterclaim. John Theodore Geiger. Let's see. But that was specifically against Maximus.
Yeah. So, they also have a lawsuit pending under Blue Sky laws because their investors are suing them right now too. So
isn't Geiger over the Clinton Foundation?
Was it what?
Wasn't he over the Clinton Foundation?
No, I don't know. I'd have to look.
Okay, I could be wrong, but that's what.
That wouldn't be shocking.
Right. That's what that's why I'm still trying to put those two together. That's why I'm still in the Maximus stuff. Sorry.
All right, guys, I got to wrap this up. I got to do some stuff, and I got to talk to a couple people. So, I'll be here on the show next time. So next Tuesday. It was nice to meet you guys.
Yeah,
meet you and all that. But I've got these. I'll go over it.
Yeah, next week we're going to really get into Maximus Inc. and how, because I think that SSA baby calculator is going to show you how they're using stuff like that to say how much you're worth.
Awesome.
So,
right. Well, God bless.
Yeah. Y'all, I appreciate everyone coming. This has been the Rights of the Few Radio with my host, Jeremy Baker. He's been busy tonight taking notes because, trust me, he is going to find a way to use this in court.
I'm going to definitely see what I can do, for real.
I know. So we will finish this in a part 2 and maybe have some times for some questions next week. So I appreciate everybody attending, and we will be back next Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And you can join us either, y'all can watch on YouTube Live. Maybe we'll have the Facebook Live figured out. Or you can join us on Zoom or on TalkShoe. You can always go to therightsofthefew.com and you will find the events page and the Rights of the Few radio link, and that'll tell you how to join. Y'all have a wonderful night. And Trey, you're amazing, the information you've dug up. And I appreciate every minute you give us. So you have a wonderful night.
Thank you. You too.